Hello, and welcome to the Zurbaran exhibition at the National Gallery in London. Now, if you read my pieces, you'll know that I have just described this show as one of the greatest exhibitions I've ever seen. And you know what? It really, really is. I mean, just look at it. So who was Zurbarán? Well, Francisco Zurbarán was born in Extremadura in Spain in 1598. He died in 1664. So that puts him right in the middle of the Baroque age, but also right in the middle of what's called the Spanish Golden Age. So that's the great years of Velázquez, of Murillo, of Pedro de Mena, of Juan Martínez Montaña, all the greatest Spanish painters. But in my opinion, Zurbarán had something more than the rest of them. Something edgier, something weirder, something that made him really stand out. He was an absolutely amazing storyteller. Now, the Catholic religion, which he represents so fully and so mysteriously, is full of strange stories. But nobody painted them quite as excitingly or as inventively as Zurbarán. So take this picture here, right? It's the first picture I remember seeing by him. It hangs normally in the Prado in Madrid. What does it show? Well, this is St. Peter Nolasco, and this is St. Peter the Apostle, the first pope. What are they doing in this picture together? Well, Nolasco has had this vision. In the middle of the night, he has a vision. He sees St. Peter in front of him, and St. Peter was crucified upside down to differentiate him from Jesus. So that's exactly what Zurbarán paints. The saint and the first pope together in one picture, but where are they? We don't know. They're surrounded by a mysterious blackness. There's just this impossible but wonderful face-off between the two of them. And if you turn St. Peter the right way round, you'll see that his face is actually rather serene. This way, it's got that strangeness, that weirdness that we always associate with Zurbarán. Something else he did better than anybody else was to paint cloth. He was an extraordinarily good capturer of different materials. Now, I went to his hometown in Extremadura, and his father's house is there, and his father was a merchant, a cloth merchant, who sold all sorts of fabrics to the rich people in Seville. So Zurbarán was brought up with an intimate knowledge of cloth and fabrics and textiles, and boy did he put it to good use. I mean, look at this picture of Saint Serapion. Now, it doesn't matter who Saint Serapion is, I don't actually know myself. What really counts in this picture is what he's wearing. I mean, look at it. You could spend hours staring at the precision, the crispness, the invention, the sheer magical reality of the way Zurbarán has painted the cloth. That's what makes this painting special. This is a room devoted chiefly to Zurbarán's paintings of female martyrs. So these are the poor girls who had to sacrifice their lives for their religion, for Christianity, usually because they wouldn't marry a pagan suitor, like a Roman soldier or something. So Zurbarán was famous for painting these female martyrs, but look what he's done with them. He's turned them into this amazing Baroque catwalk, really, of extraordinary fashions. And every single female martyr he paints is wearing something exquisite. I mean, this is Saint Apollonia. Her story was tragic. She was captured by the Romans, refused to marry a Roman suitor, a pagan suitor. So they pulled out all her teeth. And that means that today she's the patron saint of dentists. And if you look what she's holding, it's a little tooth in a pair of pliers, her own tooth that's been yanked out. So it's a horrible story, but not in Zurbarán's painting. in Zurbaran's painting, look at the clothes she's wearing. In this gorgeous pink, the yellow, the green, and this look of serenity on her face. And it's not just her. This is Saint Casilda. She was a Muslim princess who in fact ended up protecting Christians who'd been imprisoned and tortured by the Muslims. So she became a kind of quasi-Catholic hero as well. But that's not what counts here, really. What counts is what she's wearing. I mean, look at these glorious damasks, silver and brown. All these women in here, all these martyrs, share this mixture of a beautiful divine tranquility and amazing clothes. And then, look what the guys are wearing. It wasn't just posh clothes that Zurbaran could do. He could do the rough stuff as well, like these coarse fabrics worn by St. Francis of Assisi and other Franciscan monks, just itchy stuff that made them feel uncomfortable throughout the day. But this particular St. Francis, that is also a vision of the Pope, Nicholas V, who went to Assisi, where Francis is buried, went down to the crypt, looked around him, and suddenly saw Francis himself, several hundred years after his death, emerge before him, as if his whole body was still intact, nothing had happened, and he hadn't died. And what's interesting here, apart from the sheer strangeness of this image of Francis staring up to heaven, sort of still alive like a zombie hundreds of years after his death, but you see how cleverly Zurbaran has hidden his hands behind the robes, hidden his feet behind the robes, because St. Francis is normally shown with his stigmata. So in his hands he had the wounds of Christ, and in his feet he had the wounds where the nails were hammered into his feet. But Zurbaran hides all that. So all the emphasis is just on Francis's face and this strange sculptural mood. And imagine this thing looming out of a niche at you in a dark crypt. That's what you call a strange Catholic imagination. And then you've got this room here, devoted to Jesus on one side and the Virgin Mary on the other. Two great pillars of the Catholic religion, presented in completely different ways, and just astounding. This is Jesus on the cross. Just the naked figure, the little loincloth around his hips, and this dark surrounding blackness that leaves so much space for your imagination. People always say that Zurbaran's paintings have a sculptural quality, and indeed they do. From his very first Christ on the cross, he liked to give us art that had an atmosphere of sculpture about it, as if you were coming across these actual bodies looming over you in a dark niche in a church. There's this very tactile quality. But then again, look what he has around him. This beautifully painted loincloth, so white, so crisp, it's pearl white almost, painted so delicately and kind of at odds with the violence of the rest of the picture. So he was a great painter of Jesus on the cross, but he was also a great painter of the Virgin Mary. And this is a scene actually described by St. John in his Revelation, of the Virgin Mary appearing in the sky, surrounded by the sun, says St. John. And she's standing, as you can see here, on the moon. And lots of painters did this because it became a kind of encapsulation of the idea of the Virgin Mary and her immaculate conception, that she was born without sin. So in a painting like this, Zurbaran had to try and emphasize her purity, her innocence, but also her glorious divine power. And just with these simple things, just a figure in the sky, some people watching, he managed to create these images of such resounding beauty, but always with this little hint of mystery. So he could do storytelling, he could do cloth, rich and poor, he could do wonderful Jesus is on the cross, he could do exquisite Virgin Mary's ascending to heaven, and he could also do still lifes. Amazing still lifes. Most of the still lifes you see in Baroque art are overflowing with stuff. You know, lots of lemons and eggs and lobsters and fish and oysters. It's this whole idea of a glorious Baroque banquet. But not in Zurbaran's art. In Zurbaran's still lifes, you just get this small selection of objects, just a few pots on a shelf, and it's almost as if they're determined to reprimand the rest of Baroque art for all its extravagant banquets, and to aim instead at a kind of glorious spiritual purity. So this is one of his most famous still lifes, just this little collection of things arranged on a shelf. And they're almost like little humans, little portraits of objects. And just recently, this is an exquisite thing that's happened only now, just recently they found this and they found this. So that's two new paintings by Zurbaran showing the same pots. And you can see that one here and that one here. And they were probably used in the studio as a kind of pattern book. So he'd take them and put them in other pictures, and every time you see a still life by Zurbaran in the corner of one of his stories, have a look and see if you recognise it from somewhere else, because it may be that it came from one of these pattern books. But the most important thing about these is this sense of emptiness, this sense of a kind of Lentian reserve. I mean, these are some of the most amazing still lifes ever painted, I think. They really are. The last room in the show, and it's got a sense of summation about it. So, for example, here's a scene of the Virgin Mary as a young girl, and you can see on the table, still life. You might recognise it from the room before. This is his famous Agnus Dei, the sacrificed lamb that stands in for Jesus at the time of Easter. And here, Veronica's veil, from the story about the woman called Veronica who wiped Jesus' face on a cloth as he made his way to his crucifixion on Mount Golgotha, and he left his face behind on the cloth. But the one I really want to see in here is this. It's another of these glorious crucifixions. This time Jesus is wearing a rather small and modest loincloth. But what's interesting is this figure here. He's said to be St. Luke, who's now the patron saint of painters, because he was said to be the first artist to paint the Virgin Mary and the crucified Jesus. But interestingly, the suspicion is that St. Luke here, painting the glistening Jesus, is probably a self-portrait of Zurbaran himself. So I'm hoping, I'm praying, I'm trusting that this marvellous artist who gave us this extraordinary show also gave us this modest little likeness of himself.